So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, a refined and the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. The prophet was sawn in half. He was rejected by his own people, yet he have become the most important prophet, where we find then most of our understandings of the spring feast, autumn feast, related with these huge manuscripts. And then understandably, during this time where the nations are adjusting themselves and lining up themselves for the trade of the end, prior of the launching of the system, we find then many militaries are also adjusting themselves and upgrading their own forces for this new trade of the end. So then, understandably, people have ideas of warfare, people have opinions, and also they have cultures where then unnoticeably sometimes nations, they make decisions, they are not wise because of the evaluation of the holy instructions. So let's try to understand during this time where then yesterday the Navy decided then to get more destroyers, the Arleigh Burke type of destroyers, spent a huge amount of money on a contract. But then let's understand the warfare of then brute force versus stealth. From the time of the Second World War, the Japanese, from the Asian area of the world, they were very adaptable but yet simple. They were fierce but simple. So then let's try to understand what means brute force versus using the existing systems as a form of weapon. Our country, obviously, we always were straight people, but then there is a problem. We are not used of having more than one system in our own. Other countries, they don't think like that. Other countries, they work always in dual understandings, such as, for instance, trade versus military versus virtual versus money. So then let's try come up with a conclusion and truly understand firstly then the scripture. What does it mean of becoming part of the holy schedule? What does it mean then most of the world not being aware of the holy instructions, yet being saved from destroying themselves? Some of the examples of the first tabernacle service period. And then what would be then the choicest weapon of the Asians regarding then this new trade of the end? Let's analyze firstly the simplicity of the system of their own, the way they think, the way they act. Unfortunately, we are using brute force. It sends the wrong signal. So via this purchase of the Navy has shown at the future we are searching for war. It's understandable nations are upgrading themselves. It is true. But then there is a balance of production and military. That's where then we are faltering. We don't go around exposing ourselves with more military without having economics behind it. So then the Asians, they are coming up with a new system of trade, direct trade. If you read then the news from the Asian market, or then the Asian countries or the Asian countries, you find direct trade very popular. We have only one way of trade, and we don't have direct trade. Direct trade means there is no link with a central bank or then government. It is direct trade. We think then we are making deals with the nations, understandably, but it is direct trade with factories, production. It doesn't have these schemes of regular governments. It's always direct transaction, direct sending of money and investments. So when the system becomes available, there won't be a link with our central bank or government regulation. Thus then the camouflage, the virtual and the existing money market, as we are so used to it. So then, if you have a system where then becomes worldwide, obviously you would have a nice size military, understandable. But there is another point of the situation is the military of China can't englobe the entire planet. So then we have to conclude they are going to use another kind of warfare for the compensating of the distance, the vast distance of this new trade. And the name is interference. We don't think as interference as being productive. We always try to get rid of interference. Thus then, the understanding of those who think straight with a brute force versus those who are using other methods. Yet they gain a great deal of results. So let's analyze the bad decision of the Navy of acquiring these destroyers. First then, sends a signal of control, sends a signal of brute force, and then what would be then the reason for depth charging submarines? We have no reason for it. Because this new area of subs, if you analyze it, they will use interference. The analysis is very clear because, firstly, when you understand the scripture from the original manuscripts, you find scores and scores of examples where, for instance, when the people are not aware of the holy instructions, they always place themselves where then they can learn. Egypt, for instance, those 10 plagues did not take place. Those were dreams of Pharaoh. It was not the actual fact. How do we know this? Because the people of Egypt, they were not aware of the holy instructions. The holy instructions, they were given after the Egypt event. So those plagues, they were never taking place. They never did. But then it was an interference done in the spirit, and then later Pharaoh felt deceived. Thus they were able to muster an army. If Egypt was destroyed, how could they then obviously afterwards then muster an army with families destroyed, firstborn destroyed, the whole nation destroyed? How would you muster an army? The second then is Gideon in Judges. Then you find Iona, for instance. So the most of the world, they are not aware of the holy instructions, not even the Hebrews are. They have scandalized themselves for so long, they don't even know themselves the instructions. So during this time where people are learning the holy instructions so they can save themselves via the holy cities, then the world must become stabilized in trade. China can't use brute force. And they won't. Because the world is so vast. Can you imagine? They are making deals with South America, they are making deals with Europe. They don't have enough military to go so far, so fast, and they are becoming worldwide. So in order to avoid those who are then trying to do with brute force, such as us, you have to use interference. So if you do a study in a computer, you do a research, you find the Chinese, they have multiple ways of interferences. The launching of so many of these equipment in space, some of them are for television and such. But we must understand the warfare of interference, where the technology is known for a long time, but then the secrets of sending signals via air, because it's not hardwired, there are some limitations. In a radio wave, you understand there is an area of the wave where then you simply use then the voice on top of the radio frequency and then takes it away. Some of these systems using then the equipment in space, they have a similar way of doing it. So if you generate enough of this special RF, you can cause a tremendous amount of interference. So then, when these new equipment in space, they are related with research of weather and other types of searches using those equipment in space, some of them are, but they are mixed up with interference. China has then the liberty of going around the world international waters. And then they have a huge patrol is starting up with the submarines. But if you study those submarines, they are not truly very big, because they understand how to use the system. So then our Navy goes around and tries then to get destroyers. Okay, what are they going to use those for? Firstly then, in order for these equipment of interference being used, you are not going to be in the midst of the ocean sending signals. You're going to be in some country, somewhere, in some port, where then interference then is sent, and then they try to do a research where the signal is coming from in a certain part of this country, and then they're going to simply say you have a problem with your equipment. They are not going to be out there in the midst of the ocean where they can be detectable. So what should we do as a nation then, as far as making decisions of the Navy? Obviously it would be a section of it buying then simple submarines and detecting equipment, beam finders and such, and then replenishment ships. So these tiny submarines in many areas of the world simply doing patrols and receiving replenishments at sea. But then for some reason we always thought big, enormous, and then brute force and such, but the problem is other countries, they don't think like that. They are much more simpler. And if you are a believer, and you understand the holy instructions, and you understand we are during the time of the restoration of the holy cities as per the instructions of the Creator via the prophet, then you must understand, must have a stable period of time where then people can learn, yet doing trade at the same time. Another point is, if China was then involved with trying to take over the world, they would not be showing themselves so big, because these would scare the other nations doing trade with China. And China has a clean record of not invading other countries in terms of conquest. And they're going to maintain this status so then the world can become a place where they can do trade and then do what so long they waited for. So the decision of the US Navy of having these ships built is absolutely wrong. They are thinking from a standpoint that is absolutely obsolete, brute force. They don't understand how the Asians work. And they expect of hunting down submarines. What is the reason? The trade of the end is placing freighters then at the vanguard of the trade of the end. Would you mix up then heavy military in the midst of cargo ships? Would you buy sophisticated destroyers to mix themselves up with cargo ships? No, you would use equipment underground, or then submarines under the water. And inconspicuous replenishment ships. So those tiny submarines, they can stay out for a long time. Only searching for beams of interference, but not in the high seas, near the shore. Truly, during this time of the end, we are not doing the same as during the Second World War. There is a new kind of warfare, digital systems, computers, banking, and then the new trade system involved with it. So then obviously the military should be lined up with this type of end-of-time trade. We can't be used anymore brute force. Let me ask you this, using brute force, would it help then their trade system? No, you'd be in a position where then they would be causing trouble. And the problem is, they are not going to cause trouble for the nation, they are going to be causing trouble with the freighters. Those people then, with a contract from the country and the customer. So we can't think anymore as trying to control then a nation. There is no point in control of a nation, but we have to respect a contract with companies, freighters, and customers. Those freighters, they must be en route and the packages must be delivered. How is then a destroyer going to stand in front of cargo ships? So these admirals of ours, they are not thinking straight. They are very obsolete, antiquated, power-hungry, brute force, ignorant. They must start thinking simply, very objective. These new systems are not going to be out in the ocean. It has to be near the land. If they send a signal from the near of the places where then searches would be done afterwards, then it's a way out of the situation. But if these submarines are in the midst of the ocean, the signal can be easily detected. They're not going to expose themselves. That's why they have so many tiny submarines. You know, the scorpion size of submarine. Those, they kind of only go along the coast mostly. So you can understand, from point to point near the coast, then replenishing the other side, they replenish until they get home. No brute force, none of it. So during the time of the war in the Pacific, during the Second World War, we had to use brute force. But we are no longer in those times. We have to think simple, inexpensive, very objective, and not thinking anymore in high oceans in the midst of nowhere. We have to think near the coast. When interference is done, then is near the coast, so then the search is going to be upon the nation and they won't be able to find it. So it wasn't another blunt mistake of our government and our military. Hope for the best.